Right, so welcome to this tech talk on keeping application compliant and secure using release automation. We're going to go for the agenda, and we're going to walk through the introduction of the vulnerabilities we can look at, and then we'll go into the 7 habits of rugged DevOps, and then how we can use the automation within DevOps to be more compliant and to automate security testing and compliance. So when we talk about DevOps, we talk about improving quality and improving the code that we get into production. By doing this, we need to make sure that not only is the code quality good, but also that the security is actually met. Because as we move through the DevOps chain, there are many vulnerabilities. As you can see on this slide, every platform has a number of vulnerabilities. And those vulnerabilities, obviously, you need to manage those vulnerabilities. Now, if you look at this map, what you can see is these vulnerabilities from around the world. So North America has by far the biggest vulnerabilities by region, but this is a global issue. This report from Sonatype actually said that 1 in 16 downloads had a known security vulnerability. So when you're using open source, those vulnerabilities, you need to manage that. Now, all code has vulnerabilities, and as you resolve those issues, you need to manage to make sure that if you're using the open source software, you're updating the open source as and when new updates come out. And as you can see here, 6.8% of components in use had a known security defect. Now, that's not always an issue, because you can mitigate that risk. However, you need to be able to manage that. And if you come up with a vulnerability, you need to be able to actually then quickly resolve that issue. As an example, the Legion of Bouncy Castle Java cryptograph, as you can see here, was downloaded 5.8 million times with a known vulnerability. So this is an example where this is being used by development teams with a known vulnerability. And as you can see, it's a very large number. And if you look at this graphic, actually, it's like any DevOps situation, shift left. We need to test to fix the problems early. Fixing a problem in development is a lot cheaper than fixing a problem in production. And if not just the cost, but also in production, obviously what you run the risk of is your brand. Now, if you release something into production that has a known vulnerability, your brand can be impacted by that vulnerability being leaked out onto your customers. So what is the problem? So the first problem is you're using known software with latent vulnerabilities. So we need to be able to manage that. We also have unsafe development methods, and we'll talk about that. When you do find a security issue, you need to be able to resolve that issue quicker. And also the normal problem of misconfiguration of applications, misconfiguration of operating systems. And again, how do you actually quickly resolve an issue if it's been misconfigured? Now, Forrester did the 7 habits of rugged DevOps. And if you look at the first one of the first things you need to do is you need to knock down the walls, knock down those boundaries between the security group, the development teams, and the operation teams, so that they're all working together to a common goal, which is to look at security as a core component of DevOps. Understand the risk. Just because you have a vulnerability doesn't mean that you have to patch it. You need to understand what's the risk. Is the business willing to take that risk on board? And we make other ways to mitigate the risk, or we need to patch it to resolve the risk. Maintain a roadmap that's incremental. Don't just keep a big roadmap. No, do something that you can manage, you can quickly respond to change. Use the pipeline to actually do your security patching. Now, you're using DevOps to actually do your releases. You have a pipe already to get the code from development to production. Use that same pipeline for your security. And standardize. So if you're using third-party software, make sure your development teams are consistent in the software they're using, and that way, when you actually do come across a known vulnerability, you can actually quickly patch that and understand where the issues may be. And that then leads into audit trails. So knowing where you're using a component that may be vulnerable, and also testing. So testing for things that may have changed or may not have changed, or issues that may be within the code base. So how can DevOps help? So one is automation. So automation is actually quickly being able to test what you're deploying and making sure that what you're deploying is secure and has no known vulnerabilities in it. Fast feedback loop. If you find a problem, so if you find an issue with something you're deploying, quickly feeding that back into the engineering team to come up with a fix before you get too far down the line. So before you get down towards the QA and UAT, try and catch it early. Improve visibility. Make sure that everyone's aware of what you're doing. Make sure that if you find a problem, that is publicized so that other teams know that this problem's been resolved and that they can then make sure that problem doesn't then, that feedback loop is much tighter and much quicker. And again, collaborate. Make sure that you are sharing the knowledge, sharing what you find and showing how you resolve it. And then be consistent in your practices. So have a standard release practice that you can use that is consistent across all your application stacks. So security is, it should be a tenet of all your development teams. You need to be secure at the beginning. It's got to be built into your development process. So from the ground up, you have to consider security. It shouldn't be an afterthought. And it needs to be included into your testing. So as well as your development teams building in security into their code base, they need to build in the automated testing into the pipeline. So as you're testing your functional testing, your performance testing, you need to also be doing security testing at the same time. It needs to be treated as any other QA activity. And by doing this, we're actually enabling our developers. We're keeping the governance, we're keeping that control to make sure we know what's going on, but we're enabling our developers to work faster by giving them knowledge as to what they need to do to avoid vulnerabilities. And making it an integral part of the DevOps process speeds up that quality, improves the quality of the code you're deploying. With CD and the pipeline, it does bring everyone in line so you have one view of what's going on. You know what's actually being deployed and when and by whom, and that gives you this visibility of not just the release teams, but the security teams. So your InfoSec becomes a core part of your deployment process. And resolve issues quickly. So you'll always have a vulnerability that you get through. There will be new vulnerabilities found in systems that you're using. When you find them, it's quickly identifying the issue, identifying the vulnerability, and then coming up with the remediation or the patch that can then be used to resolve the problem. And that's when we talk about automated testing. So including that into your pipe. So as you go through a phase, you do your functional test, you then run your automated testing scripts that we're going to talk about in just a little while. And most security testing is just doing that functional testing, that normal security testing, looking for the known problems. If you resolve the known problems, that's a big part of the issues that you need to be able to manage. And there are other things you can then do for other issues that you're not aware of. So, functional security testing is that. It's going through the standards, using things like Selenium web drivers to do the standard testing for logins, to make sure credentials are being passed properly, making sure that the fundamental security works every time. So when you do your testing, you're testing the standard security of the product every time. You then need to look at things like non-functional tests where you're looking for weaknesses. So actually testing for known weaknesses. So one is testing the functional security of the product. The other is if there are known weaknesses, injection SSL ciphers, using those as part of your testing suite. So again, that should catch if something has slipped through that you weren't aware of. Hopefully the non-functional test will identify that before you get too far down the release cycle. And finally, you would normally do at the very end the more manual penetration type testing. Now, automating that as well. Now, don't wait until you get to your pre-production before you start doing your penetration testing. Do it early. Try and identify these things as early as you can so that you don't end up getting to pre-production before you identify a possible issue of vulnerability. So as it says here, putting a guardrail on your highway allows you to go faster, not slower. Because if you can make it safer, if you drive fast on a motorway, the guardrail is there to protect you, to keep you on that road. So as you go faster, it keeps you safe. It's not there to stop you going fast. And you need to think of that with DevOps. We're here to help you speed up your cycles, but speed it up in a safe, secure, quality way. So we have the 3 pillars within the release automation CD pipeline. So develop fast. So quickly taking those ideas, putting them through the cycle, and then pushing them through to something that actually adds value to your customers. Test agilely. So you've got your tests, but keep on looking at your tests. Identify additional tests that you should be able to run. And finally, release reliably. So you have confidence in what you've developed, so that at the end of that release cycle, you have confidence in not just the functional quality and performance quality, but also the security of what you're going to release. So we have the zero-touch deployment. So it comes in 2 parts. So release automation is very much the orchestration engine. This is the workflow, the engine that does all of the testing and the deployments. And above that, we have the continuous delivery CDE product. And this gives you that visibility into release automation to show you what's being done within the orchestration. So this is the sharing this in the wider audience. They can use CDE to identify where a release is, what's been run, and any issues that may have been arisen as part of the testing. So the 6 ways that release automation can help with compliance. The first is knowing what you're building in your build tool is what's being deployed. So when you actually generate the artifact at build time, that same artifact is tracked from development all the way through the phases, QA, UAT, pre-production, to production. So you know that the code you start with at the start of your pipe is the code that gets to the end. No one has changed it. It is exactly the same code that you've already tested. You don't want to make changes higher up in the pipeline because that's not been fully tested. So you start with your code that comes out of your development environment, and that's what ends up being pushed into production. Automating this security and testing across all your environments. So as you move through the actual phases, you can then automate your testing to make sure that in QA and UAT, you run the security tests, you do the penetration tests automatically. Now, there may be times where you have to do a manual test. And again, CDE can be used to include a manual step. So you stop the release, and then you do a manual step. Feeding this back quicker. So that feedback loop, when you identify an issue, so the automating test identifies an issue, feeding that back into the engineering team to quickly resolve the problem. We have the segregation of roles. So again, this visibility. You can give the business the view into the CDE pipeline. They can't make any changes or do any releases, but they can see what's going on. It's making it more open to everyone as to what's being done as part of the release chain. And then with that, we get the auditability and traceability. So being able to take what we've done and being able to show what was done by who, where, what, when. And use speed to your advantage. So because you can do these things quicker, you can do small incremental updates. Now, instead of doing a release every 3 months, perhaps you can do a release every month, because you can speed up the whole process of testing, of releasing, and you can know that you've actually got that inbuilt quality because you've got all that testing covered, as well as the security, as well as the other functional testing. So within the traceability, you can see here we have reports that show you what's been deployed into which environment. So if you come across a situation where some code you're using, perhaps open source, you get an announcement, there's a vulnerability in that code, you can quickly identify where has that been deployed. So which release train is using it, where is it currently in its cycle. So you can then start planning the mitigation as to what do you need to do to change out that code. Do you need to go back to the start and go back to development? Can you then do something within the environment you're in to actually just mitigate the risk and not replace it? But you have the information with you to say that artifact has been used in these environments as part of this release. That information you can then use for your planning. So in summary, DevOps, the whole concept of DevOps is to speed things up. But with DevOps, in this context, it's adding that to the compliance, helping you be more compliant as you speed up your development cycles. Automate your security testing. Make that a core fundamental of your release cycle. And use the whole CD solution stack to make you do this. Now, use all the tool stack we have, the virtual services, the actual testing, the test data management. All of these together allow you to do more thorough testing with security to ensure that you don't let vulnerabilities sneak into your release plans.